On today's episode of Crime Desk, we're diving into the world of private investigations, but with a unique perspective. Our guest is James Andrews of Magna Investigative Group. James is a retired investigator from the Huntsville Police Department who now works as a private investigator specializing in defense cases. With decades of experience in law enforcement and an in depth understanding of Alabama's legal system, James brings an invaluable experience and perspective to the complexities of criminal defense and the evolving role of private investigations. From his years on the force to his work uncovering critical evidence for defense attorneys, James has seen the justice system from both sides, and today he's here to share his thoughts, stories, and expertise. We'll explore what you should look for when you're hiring your own investigator, the types of cases where it's appropriate to do so, and we'll uncover the truth about what private investigators really do behind the scenes. James, I've had the pleasure of working with you on a missing persons case, but I know that you do a lot of other types of casework as well. Welcome to Crime Desk.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for finally agreeing to join me to do this. I've enjoyed working with you in the case that we've worked together on. It's a high-profile case out of Huntsville, Alabama. I've worked with other private investigators before, but I will say working with you has been kind of a better experience than some of the other private investigators that we've worked with before in cases. Missing person cases are oftentimes probably not the best cases for private investigative work, in my opinion, until I worked with you on this one. And you've been really helpful in this case. So tell me, what other types of casework do you do with your agency?
A big part of my business is criminal defense investigations. So I have several attorneys that I do work for. And they just, a lot of times they just need their own investigator just to kind of make sure that the case has been looked at from both sides. The police and the state, they're going to have, unlimited resources as far as investigations, gathering the evidence that they think is necessary to get their prosecution. So basically, we just go over and we'll look at all of the facts of the case, look at all the discovery material, make sure that basically that they dotted their I's, crossed their T's, that they didn't miss anything, that there's not any evidence out there that was missing. If there are any witnesses that we do run into that a lot. You might see that a witness might be mentioned just one time in a case report, but then you don't see that there was any follow-up on that. And so we'll go out, and try to find other witnesses. We go out and visit the crime scene, things like that, do our own documentation, measurements and photos and videos and different things like that. That way the defense has their own copy of stuff, and we're not just, solely relying on what the police have gathered or what the police have decided to turn over. And then, going out knocking on doors and asking people, what they saw. Sometimes, there might be people that like you've seen in this missing persons case that we've worked on together, there's sometimes when there's people that are not comfortable talking to the police. So we'll go out and, see if we can run across, any other witnesses that we didn't know about, things like that. But it's a lot of reviewing what the state already has and what the police has already turned over, and then kind of taking it from there, and just making sure that the state has done what they're supposed to do. If they're going to put somebody in prison, we just try to make sure that that they've done, that the state has done it the right way.
I actually did not know until I met you and learned about the defense work that you do that attorneys hire private investigators to go out and investigate cases that they're working on. So I think that's very interesting. And also the way that you can work with defendants, oftentimes, the system as a former law enforcement officer yourself. So what other services do you provide at Magna Investigative Group?
We do a little bit of everything. We do some workman's comp investigations that just mostly involves a lot of surveillance. We do some infidelity investigations, cheating spouses, child custody investigations. If you and your wife, you've got kids, and you're trying to gather information that that you can take to the courts to show that the other person's not fit to have the children, or something like that, or you're trying to go for custody. We do a lot of those kind of cases. um that's really the biggest part. Criminal defense has been the biggest part of the business, and then sprinkled in with a little bit of infidelity, and and child custody. We do a lot of process serving, so just finding people and delivering legal documents, and things like that. We do a lot of that for attorneys, and then I'll have people from all over the country that'll reach out and send us papers to of somebody that they need to find, somebody they need to get served. So we do a lot of that also.
Awesome. So, one of the interesting things about the missing persons case that we've worked together, we've been reached out to by some other private investigators rather aggressively. And, the family was a little bit hesitant when you sent a message because we'd already had that experience. But your approach was very different. It wasn't aggressive. It didn't really have a menu of pricing, but you really were just kind of interested in helping the family, and I think that you know I've learned that speaks to your character, and kind of the way that you do things. You've been extra generous in this case, and your work has been extremely effective. So, what are some red flags that someone may not be a licensed private investigator or a real private investigator when they're reaching out to someone that may need their help?
So the biggest thing in the state of Alabama, there's a list. So anybody can go online and find the active list of at the Alabama Private Investigator Board. They have a list of who are active and inactive licensed private investigators. So if I was giving advice, to somebody in Alabama, that would be my first piece of advice: is just go on the website. You can do a search for that person's name, and it will tell you their private investigator license number, when they got their license, and when it expires. Um, and then doing your own, research as far as, their Google reviews, and, and different things like that. Any private investigator that comes with you, I know, we were talking about this, we're talking about this case, but I know there was a private investigator that had reached out before me, and I heard, from the family that they were very aggressive in sending, hey, right away sending, hey, here's my payment link. Go ahead and send me some money. Go ahead and send me. And the family's like, well, we don't have the funds just yet. We're just getting things lined up, and from what I understand, the investigator was like, well, you can just send me what you got, and we can work it out later. Whatever. And I just to me that a missing persons case is not. I would do these absolutely 100% for free if I didn't have. I have I've got a wife and 3 kids. So I've still got a business to pay for. I've got bills to pay, and myself too. So I do have to work other cases and charge for some of the cases that I work. But it's just this case. That's not what this was about. I thought I would be able to step in. And honestly, I thought that first night I talked to you, and when I had reached out and they referred me to you, I thought I can give this case. Of course, I didn't know any details at the time, but I thought I can give a couple hours, 2 or 3 hours a week, on this case, and just help with the communication. I'll do that for free. I'm not trying to step in to make take money from the family and stuff like that. So I wasn't even. That's why I didn't send anything with pricing or anything like that, because that's not what this was about. I just thought I would step in and help. And then, of course, it didn't take long to realize that it's going to take this family needs a lot more than just 2 or 3 hours a week. This is going to be a big deal.
Yeah, we've definitely needed you every step of the way and have continued to need you. And part of that has just been, kind of check and balance of reassuring us what we're doing is the right moves. So, I know most people probably think of private investigative work as like infidelity and workman's comp, things like that. But you've been extremely helpful to us in that realm. And with your law enforcement experience, it's helped guide us in how we should step through the process. I tell people all the time, oftentimes people wake up and they check their phone and they realize they're part of a spotlight crime story. I would say this is a high profile case. So without your expertise in this case, I'm not sure where we would be or if we would have made all the right decisions to get us at least to where we are. So what is something that people should look for as far as characteristics in a good private investigator? How do you know you're picking the right one?
A lot of times I'm big on going with your gut. So when you talk to somebody, and I think that helped, like I hate that everything, revolve around this current case that we're talking about, but I think the family got that gut feeling right away from that, that other private investigator that, and they went with their gut, and I think they made the right decision, but doing research on anybody that's going to get involved in a case like this, or any case that you have where you're looking to hire a private investigator, I always encourage people to do your research. I've had clients ask. I've had individual clients, from other states and stuff that have asked for references of other clients. Have asked for attorneys that I do work for, wanting references from them, and will actually follow up on that and call because I could give you a list of names and hope that you're not going to call some of these people, or something like that. But they actually call these people and just to verify that the person's on the up and up. And then just ask them about the details of you don't have to give them all the details of your specific case, but ask them, if it's a child custody case, I may give them, if I'm the client, I may give them a little bit of information of, hey, here's what I got going on. Me and my wife are separated. I think she's living with another man. Have you handled these kind of cases before? And if they say yes, then can you tell me about some of those, not any details, but can you tell me about some of those other cases that you worked and how did you do it? Were you successful? Did you find, I know you can't guarantee results, on my case, but were you successful in other cases? Have you, run into this sort of thing before? And then can you give me some examples, without, breaking any confidentiality with another client or something, but can you give me some examples of things that you've done in the past? And just asking a lot of questions and you'll get, I talk to people all the time, and you'll get, some of those people if they're if they're BSing you, it's going to come out. If you just keep asking questions and then let them talk, it's going to come out because they're going to start stumbling around. And especially if you're asking, well, in my case, this, my soon to be ex spouse with the kids, she's staying with this guy on a dead end road. How would you handle that? If he don't have an answer for that, he may not know what he's doing. But just things like that. So it would just be you just have to pay attention to, and ask a lot of questions and then pay attention to the answers. Uh,
I
one
will
thing I,
say,
one
I
thing
will
I
say,
do notice,
go ahead.
I notice that people sometimes when people call, they will have a list of questions in their head that they think that they want the answers to, whether they've gotten that, on some show that they watched or they Googled something, or whatever, but they'll have this list in their head or written down. And I can tell when they're asking me these questions, they're not even listening to my answers. They're just waiting for me to stop talking so that they can ask their next question. And I'm like, what was the point in even going through all that work? You did the right thing. You did the research as far as, what questions you wanted to talk to a private investigator about, but you're not even listening to my answers. You're just waiting for me to stop talking so you can ask your next question. And I guess it's just maybe mentally they feel like, so I can check it off that I did, ask this investigator the right questions or whatever. But I would just ask questions and then pay attention to the answers, make sure that, and if you get a weird feeling, call around. None of these cases are, well, I can't say none of these cases. A lot of times, these cases aren't pressing. It's not like you have court in 2 days and you've got to get answers today or tomorrow. Like, a lot of times you have time. You've got, your court dates set out 2, 3, 4, 5 months from now. Sometimes you don't even have a court date set yet. So you've got time. So shop around, look around, and talk to plenty of investigators. And
I
then,
know it does feel urgent though, especially when you're the caller, and you're looking through ads or search results for private investigators. You definitely want somebody that's going to answer the phone, which I will
right.
say you make yourself very much available. And I've been quite impressed with your, I used to be a flight attendant, and federal air marshals have like their little story that they share with the passenger next to them about who they are and what they do. And I wondered, when I first started working with you, what your ulterior identity is when you do surveillance and things like that. And I will say you got a system figured out. Quite
Yeah.
impressive. So
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Yep.
So how long did you work as a law enforcement officer, and what was your role?
So I got hired on. I was in the Marine Corps, and I got out of the Marines in November of 2010, and I had saved up a bunch of leave, so um, I was able to actually leave North Carolina and come back to Huntsville 30 days early. So during that 30 days, it just so happened that I was able to take the physical fitness test to start getting hired on, which is the first step of getting hired on with the police department. So I took the physical fitness test, and that's about a 6 or 7 month hiring process. Got through that, and I started the police academy. It would have been July of 2011, and then I left there and started doing private investigations October of 23. So 12 and a half years or so.
Wow. So what inspired you to continue on in private investigation? Did this just get into your blood and you can't get it out, or
I enjoy investigations. I was a narcotics investigator as a police officer. Enjoyed doing those investigations. I like investigation work. Um, actually, while I was a police officer, I used my GI Bill, and because I had never been to college, so I used my GI Bill and got my bachelor's degree in criminal justice, and then I went on to get my master's degree. And was kicking around the idea of going to law school. I've always been interested in defense work. So I had looked into and thought about for a long time about, going to law school, nights and weekends sort of thing. Um, and it just didn't think it was going to be very practical for me to work that out. So when I started hearing about that there are, you can do criminal defense investigations, that was definitely piqued my interest. That then I could, be on that side of the table, be on that side of the courtroom, and I would have the perspective of both sides of, that I've been doing the police side for, almost 13 years. And, just looking at it from the other side, and I thought I would be able to bring a lot to the table on that.
so how does your experience as a former investigator help you in your current role as a private investigator? Is it kind of the same thing? Are you considered a civilian, or are you like if you investigate something, you find evidence and uncover something, is that able to be used in court?
It is, and I don't have, of course, as a private investigator, I'm just like any other citizen. As far as I don't have any police powers. I can't make people do anything. I can't make you talk to me. I can't write search warrants. Things like that. I don't have those tools that the police officers have. Oh, what I do have is that I can just like anybody else, but I can go out and knock on doors, and I can talk to people. And I can do those sorts of things. And when I'm looking at a case, when I'm looking at videos that the police have turned over to us, or their case reports, or their paperwork, I know, I was there in the past, so I know exactly what that officer's mindset was when he was doing this or when they were doing that. and I know exactly what, a lot of times I'll know exactly what led them down whatever trail they went down because I'm seeing things, I've seen things from that point of view too. Um, a lot of times, police officers will get tunnel vision, and I understand that. I'm sure I've been there. But now that I'm able to look at it from this side of things, it helps, I believe, that I am able to objectively look at a case from both sides. And while I can sympathize or understand why the police may have done certain things in a certain way, now I'm more sympathetic and objective on the defense side of things that, hey, just because, one piece of evidence might lead somebody to think, one thing, I can keep an open mind and look at the big picture, and look at it from all angles, I guess is basically what I try to do.
Well, when I first met you, I mean, of course, the first thing that came to my mind was he looks like a cop.
Yeah.
You
I get
definitely look like a
I get
cop.
that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. But I've seen you work, and you're an easy person to talk to. And I've seen you be able to collect evidence that investigators haven't been able to collect. And people do open up to you. I've seen you talk to people that I would be afraid to talk to. So, you definitely will knock on any door, even if I think you're crazy and think you shouldn't. You do anyways. So you're not afraid to get out there and actually do the work, and you're not shy about it. And even though you do look like a cop, um, people for some reason are just willing to talk to you. I think you being sympathetic. I think that comes through in your work. It certainly comes through in your personality, and you're easy to work with, very reasonable to work with, and I think people are definitely making the right choice with hiring you. So what are your favorite kinds of cases to do? I hear you talking a lot about the defense work, but do you you know, uh, like high level like murder cases? What is your favorite kind of criminal work, investigative work to do?
I enjoy the criminal defense cases, and this missing persons case in particular has really made me. I would like to focus on missing person cases more. Um, I
Have
don't
you
think
learned a lot working in this specific case that you could take with you to other cases?
I have, yes. And it's very even though this case has not we don't have an outcome for this case yet. We don't have a payoff, good or bad, in this case yet. But it has been very rewarding already, just for me, just knowing that I may be able to provide some clarity for the family, or some answers that we have come up with through this investigation that has already provided some clarity for the family. And so to me, that it's very rewarding to know that even though we haven't, like I said, we haven't had the ultimate outcome on this case, but we have been able to provide some um, just assistance through the whole thing, and some closure on some certain matters in the case, some understanding that of where this case could lead. Just being able to help the family. And so, like I said, I would work these cases for free, and work a lot more of them, if I didn't have bills to pay myself. But I think that's been the biggest thing is I love doing investigations. And with this type of investigation, you really feel like you're doing something good to help people. And so helping this family, um, has that's rewarding for me, is just helping them.
Well, it's gone both ways. We don't do anything without your approval. You're one of the deciders in what we do, but this case specifically it's been multidimensional. It's changed course into an active abduction case. But in the course of that, we brought on other agencies. So we're working with U.S. Marshals, the FBI, multi-jurisdictional sheriff's offices. And so having your knowledge and your know-how, even just to help us ask the right questions to the actual investigators on the case, and to make suggestions that are not so left or right fielded, but are more aligned with the investigative techniques that they're actually using. That's helped so much. And just to again explain, what they're experiencing as they're going through it. In these cases, they kind of take on a life of their own. Sometimes they get solved very quickly, sometimes they take a long time. But it's definitely moved the needle to have you involved versus to work this without having your input. I feel like we would be doing so blindly, and I work a lot of these cases myself, but I've certainly learned a lot working alongside you, so it's been great to have you for this one. So, what does a typical day look like for a private investigator in Huntsville, like yourself?
That's another reason I like it is because every day is different. Some days I don't know what I'm gonna have going on or what I'm gonna have pop up. I had big plans yesterday of all these things that I was gonna do, and I got up and got one of those tasks knocked out, and then the rest of the day was completely different. Then I ended up being on the phone for 3 hours with uh, two different, a potential client for over an hour about her case. Another current client. I ended up having a new client come in, to talk about another case. So like the whole day just completely changed. Right now today, I was up at 4:30 this morning. Went out. I had a surveillance case that I had to do this morning from 6 to 8. And went out and took care of that. Came to the office, sat down, pulled out the file because I've got a criminal defense case coming up that I've got to do some work on, and got about 20 minutes into that and started getting phone calls on other stuff, some other stuff that was pressing that came up that needed to be taken care of, so just things like that. So that's why it can be stressful, I guess. But that's also why I like it. And I'll never complain about having too much work. So, that it's good, but it just depends. Some days like I'll have to so I have to set aside a day just to go out and do process serving, just trying to find people that need to get served. So I'll spend a whole day doing that. If it's a pretty day, I'll do that on my motorcycle, so I can do a little bit of relaxing and go out and ride the motorcycle. Had a case the other day. It was a couple hours away. It was a pretty day. I was just going to be needing to take some pictures and some videos, so I took my motorcycle and rode out, took the country roads, and went and took care of that case. Other days I have to set them aside for like criminal defense work. There's some days when I have to do nothing but schedule interviews, and because we're talking to witnesses and talking to the accused and going to the jail to meet with the accused and talking to the accused family, and stuff like that. So it's a lot of juggling goes on, but I like it. I'm not one that I do a lot of desk work because there's a lot of paperwork and a lot of stuff that's got to be reviews, but I wouldn't consider myself, I'm not somebody that could do like a normal desk job. If put me in HR, or somewhere or something like that where I'm stuck behind a computer doing a certain task all day, I would go crazy. So I like the diversity and the different types of work, different stuff.
I've noticed you do work a lot overnight, in the wee hours, especially surveillance and things like that. So, when you're an investigator with the local police department, you kind of have bank hours. You really have to cram your work in, like between 8 and 5. But being a private investigator and having your own agency, you really can make your own hours, and you can really hit these cases in the time slots that best serve the case, right?
Right. Yeah.
So where all will you work? I know you're you're based out of Huntsville, but you work all over Alabama. I've noticed you've been in Birmingham and some other cities nearby Huntsville. Where all in Alabama will your work take you?
Yeah, so I'm licensed in Alabama, so I can work anywhere in Alabama. I try to stay Birmingham and north. Um, it just kind of depends on the case. It's like with some cases, it might only be a couple $100. It's not worth me driving to the other side of the state. Even if it is an easy case where you just need pictures of something, I'm going to have to charge you so much to make it worth my time and mileage and effort, to go that I'll refer you to somebody else, in some of those cases, another PI or something like that. But, so I try to stay Birmingham and north. Most of my work, right now, all of my criminal defense work is Madison, Morgan, Jackson counties, Coleman County. And then the other parts of my business, we would do pretty much all counties in North Alabama.
So, how do you approach gathering evidence for defense case compared to working as like an investigator with the police department? I know you said you'll knock on doors and things like that, but is it more difficult being that you aren't deputized or you don't have that badge?
It can be more difficult, and that's why I think one of the biggest benefits or one of the biggest skills you can have is talking to people and knowing how to talk to people, and just being polite and professional, but stern when you need to, or whatever. Um, but you like I said, you've been out, with me at times when I talk to people, and it's just, I always try to keep in mind the way I try to come across is that nothing's a big deal. Nothing's that big of a deal. We're just people talking. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about your child custody case or we're talking about the capital murder that you're accused of. We're just people having a conversation. Nothing's that deep. And I mean, it is that deep, but I try to come across as nothing's that deep. Let's just have a conversation. I've gone, in this case, the missing persons case, and I think I've told you about, or I know I had told you about it, but I knocked on that lady's door. I knocked on a lady's door that I thought maybe she could be a witness, didn't really know, and talked to her for a second. And as soon as I told her who I was, she was like, "Oh my God, I'm so glad you're here. Get in here, close the door." And offering to cook me food and just, I've got so much I want to talk to you about, and I've got so much I want to tell you. And, and look at this stuff that I've gathered myself, and stuff like that. Um, and I think
We
it,
never would have had that information had you not knocked on that door. And that
right,
was such valuable information to us. And we wouldn't have even thought to knock on that door.
right. Yeah. And it's just, and I don't think it's anything, I'm, I don't think it's anything special about me or anything that made her, do that, but it's just the way you talk to people. It's just, um, you know, I don't know
Well,
how
you're
to
not overly
explain it,
aggressive. You're
Right,
not overly aggressive. And, a lot of times when you're working with law enforcement officers that were former military, that's kind of encased in there. It's like this over aggressive. And then, you don't BS people to get them. You do just kind of have a simple conversation with people, but they do open up to you. I mean, there is an art there to how you talk to people and the level in which you start that conversation, I think.
yeah, you talking about, coming out of the military and then going into the police force. When I first became a police officer, I didn't have those skills. I'm sure I didn't. I'm sure I was too aggressive. I came from, going to Iraq. I was a combat Marine. So going to Iraq and Afghanistan, and within a year of coming back from combat in Afghanistan, I'm back living in Huntsville and trying to be a cop, and so less than 2 years later, I'm a cop patrolling the streets of Huntsville. So I'm sure there was this, the James that you talk to and see today is not the James that was a rookie police officer. I'm sure I did not know how to talk to people, and I'm sure I was overly aggressive and badge heavy, and I'm the police, and you're gonna do what I say, and things like that. But you learn, and I learned quick because I found I was working I was assigned to third shift, and I found an officer that he was a senior officer, had been there for several years, had been a police officer for several years, and me and him really hit it off, and I liked the way he worked. I liked the way he talked to people, and so I pretty much put myself in his shadow and just followed him around everywhere he went all night. I'm sure I aggravated him, but everywhere he went, calls he went on, cars he would stop. He liked to look for narcotics and stuff like that, and that was something I was interested in. So that was a big plus. But I would go out with him and I would learn how he talked to people. And this man, he can talk you into anything, and without being aggressive and without putting his hands on you or anything like that. He knew how to talk to people, and I learned so much from following him around and working with him. I've seen him go on domestic violence calls, and by the end of it, he literally, not making the story up, him tucking the people into bed and singing to them.
Wow.
And yeah, so like just eh, like he's still one of my best friends, and but I learned a lot just from watching him work. And then one of my other really good friend, one of my other best friends, he's in narcotics, and the same thing. Once I've kind of started following him around and trying to learn from him and just learning how he talks to people and how he interviews people, and he's another one of those. He's not overly aggressive. Nothing's a big deal. That's the way it comes across. I used to train officers as a patrol officer, and so I would always tell them, and I would kind of give this example that it doesn't matter what you walk up on a traffic stop. Nothing's that big a deal. If you walk up to a truck and there's a body laying in the back of the truck, it's not that big a deal. We're going to pretend like this is just a regular traffic stop. Hey, sir, how you doing? Listen, I pulled you over because you was going a little fast back there. Is everything going okay? Nothing's a big deal. You just still talk to them the same way. You see all these officers, they get a little bit of amped up and they start yelling and cussing and carrying on. And a big part of the population out there, you start talking to them like that, they're going to start talking to you back, and then you're going to get more aggressive, and then they're going to get more aggressive, and things are going to get out of hand. But you just walk up and just keep in mind, like nothing's that big a deal. No, it's not that big a deal. We're just
Yeah, you can really see in a lot of these, we see a lot of police shooting cases, and they'll have like a review 90 days later. Um, and that's usually when they release like the body cam footage. And there usually is a point of escalation there. And oftentimes I feel like, yeah, if they had just kind of kept it smooth, they would have had a way to disengage the situation. But yeah, sometimes they kind of get overly aggressive and it takes a turn for the worst. It is really how you talk to people, and you can really shut people down really quick, even by just not letting them talk or talking over them. So you're a good listener, and you don't show up like you know everything either. Um, I think it's, and like you said, you've learned a lot working this case. So it's good to always be able to continue to learn and to have somebody to learn from, leading by example. It's great that you had that example. I think a lot of beginner rookie officers, beat cops, they're just getting out there and they don't really have somebody looking after them, or if anything, they've got somebody kind of amping them up on the job. And it is good to kind of just get in there and, be smooth. I think
Yeah.
people are more responsive to that. Of course, on the airplane, I flew all international and we had nowhere to land. So it's definitely not a place you want to amp something up. We always try to de-escalate, but some people don't get that memo. So, what are some of the unique challenges working with defense cases versus just somebody giving you a call? I guess what are some of the challenges on like personal cases or for hire cases versus defense cases? Because in defense cases, you kind of have a folder and a case file already lined up. But when you're working for somebody that's hired you personally, I'm sure there's a lot of dynamics that come into play in those cases, right?
There are, and the biggest, when you said that, the first thing I think about is just managing expectations of the regular citizen that hires a private investigator. That's one thing I try to be very clear about up front when I have my initial consultation with people. And then I have a long retainer agreement that we both sign, and we go over that, and and it also discusses managing expectations of what what I can and cannot do, and what the client may think because they've seen something on a TV show or they saw something in a movie they may think that I can do. I got a call this morning and I don't know what this guy was doing up. I got a call at 6 something this morning um, from some guy, and he's wanting me to hack into his wife's phone and her Instagram.
Ooh, how much
And
does that cost?
I said that I can't. You know, I can't. The way he was saying things and stuff, I said, I don't think I'm going to be able to help you. And he said, well, I'll pay you. I'll pay you good. I'll pay you real good. I need to get into her phone. And I was like, well, if that's your wife, you don't have access to her phone. And he was like, no, she left me a while back, and um, but I know you can do it. I need you to get her phone. I need you to get her phone. I need you to get into her phone. However you got to do it. I know you can do it. And I was like, no, that's just not. And he kept saying, well, I'll pay you. I'll pay you extra. Like, give me a number. And I was like, no, it's not worth, me losing my license and my business and everything else just to help do some
Well,
weird, shady stuff with your ex.
so if you're doing like infidelity case and you're doing surveillance, like let's say I hire you to do surveillance on my girlfriend or my fiance or my wife or whatever, are you gonna give me that information? And then if I become irate when I get that information, then how do you handle that?
So in my retainer agreement, and I always try to discuss it with the client ahead of time, that I'm not going to give live updates while the investigation's going on. And I had to learn this lesson the hard way, and I really should. I was kicking myself. I should have known better. But I had a case where the client had hired me. It was a family member that was actually paying me for an infidelity investigation, and I was talking with the client and talking with the family member, and we were using GPS tracker and stuff like that to see what this guy was doing. Um, and I made the mistake of letting them know that, because it was one of those situations where we knew something was going on. We knew kind of what was going on, but we had not been able to catch it, on video or on camera yet. And I kind of got carried away and got excited that, hey, I've got him at the place where we were suspecting, he's going to see this girl, and so I let them know that, and I did it, because I wanted them to, have some comfort in knowing that, hey, this is finally paying off, and this case, is going to be coming to a close, because I think now we're going to have what we need. Well, they called me about 30 minutes later and was like, hey, I hope this is not going to mess you up, but we're headed there, and we're going to confront him when he walks out. And I was like, well, that just seems like a terrible idea. Like, let's hold off, and but they did, and they showed up, and they showed up and they showed out. And so after that, I do not give any more live updates, which I get it. It's emotional. If you're suspecting infidelity or, something like that, you're going through a divorce, it's an emotional situation and emotions can get carried away. And if you got a text message or a phone call from your investigator that said, "Hey, that spouse that you were asking me about, they're laid up in the bed right now at such and such address with another person," it's probably going to be hard for you not to show up over there and say something
It's
to
going to
you.
be an episode of Cheaters. I can tell
Yes.
you right now. Yeah.
Yes. So now I hold all that information, and like I said, I should have known better. But that case taught me a lesson. But I hold all that information, and then I compile it at the end, and then I will, depending on what the outcome was of the case, I'll have a meeting with you. We'll go over everything. I give you a detailed written report on everything that was done, with days of surveillance or GPS tracking, um, and a copy of any of the photos or videos that were collected during the investigation. And then I'll also, a lot of these are divorce cases, or they may turn into divorce cases. So I'll also provide all that same information directly to the attorney. The attorneys like to get it firsthand from the investigator instead of just getting a copy of things from the client. That way, kind of a chain of custody issue with, well, that way the other side can't say that the client did anything shady with the photos or the videos, or anything like that. So I try to make sure I use Dropbox. So, I'll put all that stuff in a file on Dropbox. I'll send the client the link, or I'll give the client a thumb drive with it, and then I'll send the attorney a link for the Dropbox, and then they'll have access to everything also.
You bring up a good point. I mean, I'm sure a lot of times people say, oh, I don't really have the money to hire a private investigator. I think I could case this out myself. That's a bad idea, wouldn't you say?
That's a terrible idea. Terrible idea. Too many emotions involved.
Well, and
And
also
and
the
two, you could run into criminal, a criminal issue of stalking,
stalking, yeah.
harassment, things like that. That if it's, a party that you're involved with, and then like in dating situations, people will call me, "Hey, this guy I've been dating for 3 months. So once you put a tracker on his car," well, no, we're not going to do that. That's illegal. So we're not going to do it. Well, but you're a private investigator. If I hire you to do it, why can't you do it? Well, because it's still illegal. I can't just go around putting you don't have the rights to that person's vehicle. So you can't give me the permission to go put something on that person's vehicle. So like I said, it's a lot of just managing people's expectations. But yes, to get back to that question, yeah, it's a terrible idea. You got emotions are involved. I haven't heard about it, directly. I don't know of any cases in particular, around here but I have heard, different parts of the country, people people do crazy things when they're in that emotional state of, you walked in, you pulled up to a place and you see, well, no, I take it back. There is a specific case that just happened, not too far from here that, from what I understand, that the spouse or soon to be ex-spouse pulled up and saw them with another person, and he's in jail now. So
Well, I have a case that kind of hits on this a little bit. It's a homicide case, but before the homicide, it was a young girl and her boyfriend, and they were actually living on the property of the grandfather. The grandfather put a tracker on the boyfriend's vehicle. Luckily, he did because now we were able to find her body after she was brutally murdered because of the tracker. Um, but the grandfather did not have a right to put that tracker on that car. And not only do we know where her body is, but we also know the day in which he killed her and that he drove across the state of Georgia with her body looking for a place to dump it. Ended up not being able to find a place, drove it back to South Carolina, and eventually disposed of her there. However, the prosecution is making a big deal out of, the defense, I should say, is making a big deal out of the prosecution using all of this evidence as evidence because it was obtained illegally,
Right.
which means most of this evidence is probably not going to be admissible to the case in the court of law. And then that's going to pose a huge issue when it comes to prosecuting the case. I think the police thought, you know, amidst their investigation that all their T's were crossed and all their I's were dotted. And then now to find out that he actually um, was not the registered owner of that vehicle that he was tracking, which makes all their evidence muck,
Yeah.
essentially. So, but if we had gotten a private investigator and done it that way, then that would have brought some legitimacy to it, and it also would have made it a third party. And also, we would have probably found out that you can't track this vehicle if you don't own it or you're not registered to it. So,
Right. Or if you're not
should have
married,
made
if
that
you
phone
you
call.
know if you're married to somebody, then it's in the state of Alabama at least, it's marital property. So
Private property.
what's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine, and I've got access to your vehicle, you got access to mine, and we can both be sneaky, and we can both put trackers on each other's vehicles, and everything's
Ooh, have you ever
completely
had that happen?
uh,
Do you ever
not
have the
not
husband and the wife as clients at the same
not
time?
no, that I wouldn't be able to, but I haven't even had that as an option yet. And I don't know what I would say. I need to figure out what I would say, if, you know, uh, John calls
You'd be like,
me.
I'm already working for your wife.
Right, I can't say that. Like what, John calls me and says, "Hey, I need you to look into my wife Jill," and
Yeah.
I'm sitting here looking at Jill's file because she's already my client, and I've been
Because you've
watching
been watching
John.
John.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't
that's
know.
funny.
I guess I just have to tell them that I'm covered up right now and not taking any new cases. But
Yeah, tell him you have this missing persons case. It's really running you pretty ragged.
yeah, yeah.
Hey, James, what are some of the technologies that you use? I've been really curious about this. I know people do, Google searches. We know they're not very reliable. Um, I use Truth Finder. I think it's a great way to find information and people that you may be looking for. But what are some of your favorite technologies or most trusted technologies that you use or that you would recommend people use as they're sifting through and figuring things out?
I've got several databases that I subscribe to, Tracers, IRB, been verified. Some of those are just a flat. Some databases, you can just do a flat monthly fee. I think been verified, it's just a flat monthly fee, and then I can do. I don't know if it's unlimited searches, but it's hard to get all the information that you need from one database. So it's always good to have multiple databases that you have access to. Tracers is a monthly fee plus certain prices per search and different things, and depending on how detailed you want to get into a search, stuff like that, the prices will go up. So some of it can be, get expensive, and then same with IRB, it's a monthly fee and then a price per search. But those give a lot of good information. That's one thing that has been taking some getting used to. In the police world, I had access to, a lot of databases, nationwide stuff, inside information, and all that kind of stuff. So it's been you have to do a little more research. You have to do a little more comparison, and things like that in the civilian world. And that, yeah, like I said, having multiple databases to access, because a lot of those stuff, depending on the database too, and depending on what kind of information you're looking for, they don't update those databases every day. So, or not even every week sometimes. So if you're, looking for somebody's current address of where they just moved 2 weeks ago, it's probably not going to be in there. It's going to take, it could take months for that to update in the databases that we have access to. As far as like, tools, physical tools that I use, I've got drone, of course, a good camera, low light camera, video cameras. I've got covert cameras, hidden cameras. I've got cameras that I can carry around with me in the store, and you'll think, it just looks like I'm carrying something else. So it's just got and they make several different kinds. I'm looking at buying some stationary covert cameras that are disguised as different objects that you see out in the world, and those will come in handy. E- the drone comes in very handy. You just you have to be careful about privacy issues and where you can and can't fly, and stuff like that. But a lot of times there's the most time where I use it, I had a client ask me, why can't you fly the drone and get down there and look in the window, of this house? And I was like, no, that's not like, I'm not going to jail for your case. Like that's, um, so you can't do stuff like that. You can't invade somebody's privacy with it. But a lot of it comes in handy when you're doing a surveillance case or whatever, and it's a rural area where there's not a really good place to park. You can't watch the road to see when this person leaves, or things like that. Um, you can get down to the park and put up a drone, and you can be able to watch the road, and then that way when they left, when they came, things like that. You can't go snooping around somebody's property. You can't go snooping in their backyard with a drone, and things like that. GPS trackers, use those a fairly good bit. Um, and yeah, I had a lot of experience with GPS trackers for vehicles in the police world. And of course, you got to get a warrant, get a search warrant to put a tracker on somebody's vehicle in the police world. And in the civilian world, the only thing I need is proof that you have a right to that vehicle, and then of course your permission to put the tracker on. So in cheating spouses cases and things like that, we can put a tracker on the person's vehicle, go out in the middle of the night, put it on. If they're going to be at the doctor at a certain time, I can go out there and put it on, different things. And then and then I have access. I don't let the client have access to that information until the investigation's done. I've got an app on my phone where I can check it, and then I've got it, of course, on my computer where I can check it. And if there's certain places that we suspect that, if you got your spouse and you suspect that she's cheating with, you know, Joe Blow at work, if you know where Joe Blow lives, then I can put a geofence around Joe Blow's house on the tracker. And then that way it will notify me, it will send me a text and an email to say, hey, he just arrived inside the geofence at such and such. And so then that gives me the opportunity. It saves me time, and it saves you money because you're not having to pay me, 8 or 10 hours a day to go sit on surveillance on this guy. It saves, I charge you by the week for the GPS tracker, but it saves you in the long run because now I just got notified that he just got there. Now I can drop whatever it is that I'm doing, and I can run over there, and I can wait for him to come back out. I can take pictures of his car there, their vehicle at that house. I've had some cases where did that, set up on surveillance on this girl's house where this guy was, and they came out and were making out standing in the driveway. And so I was able to get all that on video, and it was all thanks to a tracker. We didn't even know where this girl lives. We didn't even know who this girl existed. The spouse just suspected that something was going on, so we put a tracker on, got him going to this girl's house, and then got video of him making out in the driveway, not in a car, just standing in the driveway in the middle of the day. So
Wow.
things like that. But the GPS trackers, they come in very handy. I've got some long lens capability. I know me and you had talked about cameras and lenses and stuff at one time. Got some, we can do pretty good distance away. Um, I do need I need like a night vision camera. I have, I've got a really good camera that has good low light capability, but I really would like to get if anybody wants to throw me a throw me a night vision.
We'll have to put your Amazon wish list out there.
Oh yeah.
I recently found a binocular. It's just one binocular, and invested in that. It's about $100, and changed my life in a lot of ways. And I'm really amped up right now. Like, I'm dying to see your hidden camera collection and some of the tools that you use. I just think it's very interesting. And being able to investigate and not blow your cover. Of course, with media, we're very apparent about what we're doing. But sometimes, that hidden camera is what I need. So it's very
Yep.
interesting to me.
Yep.
So, are there any misconceptions that people have? I had another missing persons case, very high profile case, where the family hired a private investigator, and the police department really made a mockery out of that investigator. I don't, and it was the town that she had retired from. She did 32 years there, and they really made a mockery out of her. Clean disciplinary report. Excellent investigator. Also has a way with people. I don't know, but you have a great relationship with Huntsville Police Department, and other police departments in the area in which you work, and seemingly a lot of respect. So, what are the misconceptions that people have about private investigators, that you'd like to set straight?
I think just the biggest misconception is that people just think that we can do more than what we can actually do. I have to remind people that I don't have police powers. I can't make the police do, what we want them to do. The police are gonna, even though I'm still close with a lot of police officers that I worked with and a lot of investigators that I worked with, um, they're not gonna they're not gonna do anything out of bounds for me, just like they wouldn't with any other citizen, and I wouldn't ask them to. But
Right.
I'm not gonna be able to get them to do any more. I can provide, hopefully provide some more understanding about different practices and the way the police did certain things, or why they did certain things, or why they didn't do certain things, and stuff like that. And I could talk to officers or talk to investigators. Um, but I don't have, just because you're hiring a private investigator that is also, former police officer at a certain department or whatever, I'm not going to have that much, more ability to get anything done than anybody else, other than having the understanding of how both sides work, and how to communicate with investigators, and and things like that.
Well, they didn't look at you as you're a joke like they did my other private investigator in my other case. They really just laughed at her for even being involved in our case. Um, and, kind of made a mockery out of her not having police powers. But she was instrumental in that case, as you have been this one. And I mean, no, you haven't like called in any favors or done anything like that. But the conversations that you've had, with the agency that we're working with, and then brought back, to our group, you've kind of been a bridge in between and kind of braced some of that communication. And it seems like they respect you, and your prior experience as a law enforcement officer, I think, has a lot to do with that. But yeah, I think a lot of the misconceptions around private investigators may be that they, can do more um, than what they're, I guess, uh, that they're not deputized or that sort of thing, but also that, um, maybe that private investigators, will absolutely always find something. And like you said, being upfront about, setting the expectation outright. I think it would be difficult to be a law enforcement officer and have police powers, and then go into private investigations where you don't have police powers. Is that sometimes frustrating? that you can't just serve a search warrant and get phone records back or something like that. You got to find another way to work the deal, don't you?
It definitely is, and that's we've seen it in this case. I would love to have access to all of the missing person case, the all of his financial records, all of his prior phone records. There's so many things I would love to have access to that I don't have access to, that the police do. And I mean, of course, we're glad that they do, but it's one of those like, oh man, I wish I could see that. I wish I could get, just to be another set of eyes on that evidence, or it may not be evidence, but just to see, that might lead me somewhere else, or something. But uh, getting a look at, if writing a search warrant on somewhere, I can't do that.
What
Um,
has been helpful when you've said what we should be asking for or explained, how warrants work, that they take time to come back, that they take like a whole day to fill one out.
yeah,
And sometimes you fill one out and you send it in, you get information back. And then when you're reading through that information, it may cause you to do another one for something else or to dig a little deeper.
right.
So all of those, while you can't write search warrants, you've certainly been very helpful in helping us to understand which things we should ask for or notify the police that this individual has so that they can look into those things. That's been helpful.
And then going back to, how you talk to people and building relationships with people, even though you can't, in this case, I can't write a search warrant on a certain place. But because of the way that I was talking to a certain possible witness, or, possible family member of a witness, they offered the key and said, you can have the key and go, y'all can go do whatever you need to do. Go look, go search it and stuff like that, and that even though we didn't, but stuff like that, that's huge, because just based on how you talk to people and building
Huge does not
relationships with
even
people.
begin to describe that in this, like, monumental,
Yeah,
literally monumental. Yeah, you've definitely cracked a lot of doors in this case that we just wouldn't have ever arrived at without you. So, I guess what advice would you give to somebody who's thinking of becoming a private investigator, with or without law enforcement experience?
without law enforcement experience, I would definitely get under the wing of a current investigator, somebody who is experienced that you can learn from. There's so many aspects to this job that if I just came off the street, as I've been working at Walmart for the last 10 years, and I've decided that I want to be a private investigator, I wouldn't have had a clue, what I was doing.
You can really muddy up a case real fast. We've seen an example of that actually. So
Yes,
don't want to do
yes,
that without some
yes,
proper training and understanding of just how the details and the specifics around the case need to be protected, not only for the investigation, but also for the prosecution.
correct. And to have that evidence, whatever evidence you collect, hold up in court, and whether that's a civil matter or a criminal matter, your background, your training, and your experience matters. That's one of the first things they're going to ask you on the stand, no matter what you're there to testify about, is tell me about your background and your training and your experience. What makes you qualified to do what you did in this case, and what makes you qualified to testify to what you're about to testify to. And so being able, if you had no investigation experience, except for, you always watch, the ID channel, or you always watch these shows, or whatever, and that's the only investigation experience that you've had, you need to get with a good investigator. Alabama has a apprenticeship program, for private investigators, where you can work under another private investigator, and you can learn the tools of the trade, and learn what you're doing, get your license, and then, and just start baby steps. You don't if I didn't have police experience and if I didn't have, all that experience in the police world, I wouldn't have been comfortable just opening my business and stepping into one of the first cases that I got assigned was a capital murder case. And, if I didn't have that experience where I came from, that probably would have freaked me out. It would have blown my mind and I would have been way over my head. But having some experience, and things like that, even though I never investigated a capital murder, on the police side, it's still, just having some police experience helped. Um, but then, being in the police world, I didn't have any experience investigating domestic relationship stuff, child custody. I've never messed with child custody, process serving, delivering legal documents. I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't because I worked for a municipal police department, so we didn't deal with serving papers and stuff like that. The county does. So I didn't even know that was a thing, and I didn't even know that was a thing that private investigators do, or that there are designated people that that's their whole business is serving papers. So there was a lot of stuff that I learned, and I think we've talked about it, all the little things like designing a website and figuring out how you're going to take one of my first clients. She was like, all right, that's great. How do I pay you? And I was like, well, I hadn't even thought about that. I hadn't even
Yeah.
I hadn't even thought about how I'm gonna take payments. Like I had a bank account set up, but I hadn't even thought about how am I gonna take like credit card payments or online payments, or whatever. And so I had to be like, I had to say, well, let me call you right back with that information. I'll send it over to you, and then I'm online, setting up Square and all these other, payment options, for people and trying to add that to my website. So it was a big learning curve, going from the police world where everything's already set up for you. The whole system is already set up. All you got to do is, just be the cog in the wheel and do your part, to branching out on your own and learning all these other aspects of different investigations and what what does a domestic case need when it goes to trial, if you or when it goes to a civil trial, as far as like a divorce case. What is it that that client needs? Um,
So, what's one thing that you wish that people understood about investigative work that they often don't understand that you have to explain?
uh, One thing is managing their timeline. A lot of clients will come in thinking, like I said, their spouse may have moved out last weekend, and today's Tuesday, or whatever, and they're like, yeah, I need you to get on this today, tomorrow. Do you think you can get all the evidence that I need by the weekend, and stuff like that? And so I try to explain to him, man, I get it's you have to be very delicate. It's a emotional situation, but you have time that y'all just separated 2 days ago. Um, you're not going to be taking this in the same with a child custody case, or something. This is not going to go to court. You're not going to be in court for, 6 months for a year from now. Um, so we have time. Yes, we'll go ahead and get started on it. We'll go ahead and get our ducks in a row, and we can go ahead and throw a tracker on, if it's one of those situations, or something like that. But this is not a thing where um this is something where you need to hire an investigator, and I've heard of some investigators charging double. So it's not one of those things where you've got to pay double to get this investigator to drop everything he's doing and get on your case right away. Because if your spouse is cheating, um, he's not going to stop cheating tonight. So
Yeah, and you really do want to kind of space those services out, right? I mean, if I'm going to hire you to do surveillance on someone, maybe we want to do it on a Thursday, maybe we want to do it on a weekend, maybe we want to wait a couple weeks and then do it again. Really spacing that out, you would get more,
yeah,
essentially,
and
right?
I've had clients, they'll come in and they'll have a timeline written out that, hey, here's when I want surveillance done. And I'll look at it and we'll discuss it, and I'm good with the first couple of dates and times that you have on there. Go ahead and putting you on the schedule for those dates and those times. But investigations are fluid. Like, you have to be flexible. And so if I had one case, where I was watching this guy. They wanted me to watch him every day at lunch and every day when he left work. Um, and I did that for several days. But the place where he worked at, they have a cafeteria there, and he never leaves for lunch. And so, I'm wasting 2 hours of your money that you're paying me to go out. And so I told the client, I said, I don't think lunchtime is, I don't think that's beneficial for you. I'll do it if you insist, but I don't think that's the best, expenditure of your funds on this case. I would focus more on these times, or I would focus on, there's no reason for me to watch him on days when we know that he's got to go pick the kids up from the daycare, things like that. But they would want me to, originally when they came in, they wanted me to do those days. Well, unless he's a complete idiot, he's not, cheating. He's not taking his children around another woman. So why are you wanting to watch him while he's got the kids if this is a infidelity investigation? Things like that. So just managing their expectations. What they think they want is not always what they need. With a child custody case, if you think your spouse or your soon to be ex-spouse or your ex-spouse, in Alabama, in the divorce papers, most of the time it says that you are not allowed to cohabitate with a member of the opposite sex while you have the children. And so we run into that a lot where, baby mama has the kids on the weekends, but she's living with another guy. And so they want proof of that. And so we'll go out and get, and they'll say, well, can you go out one day and get me pictures of that? Well, it's not that simple because you have to be able to prove that that person stayed there all night. You need to send an investigator out. You need to go out at 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night, take videos and pictures or whatever of the vehicles that are there at the house. And then you go back at 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning and you take pictures again on the same night. That way you can show that that vehicle stayed there overnight. It's not enough just to have pictures of the car at night, and it's not enough just to have pictures in the morning. You have to have them both at night and in the morning. Um, because they could say anything when it gets to court. Their attorney can argue anything. They could say, well, you go in there and say, well, we got pictures of her car there at 11:30 at night. All she's got to say is, yeah, I left there at 11:35 and I went back home. I took the kids back home. Or if you've only got pictures of the car there at 5 in the morning, logically, yes, we know that they stayed there overnight. They didn't drive there, at 5 o'clock in the morning and you just happened to catch their vehicle there. Logically, we know that, but that's not going to stand up in court. All she's got to do is say, yeah, I drove over there at 4:55 that morning so that I could have breakfast with my boyfriend, or whatever. Um, Even, like I said, we know that's not true, but you got to be able to prove it in court. So just managing their expectations, explaining to them what evidence it is they need. Sometimes you have people, that think they need, they think they want certain things, whatever, and I have to explain to them, that's not going to help you in court. The opposing attorney or the opposing person, if they, want to lie about something, if they lie about this, that's not proof that they're lying. Um, I've got, another client that right now, and and I agree with him. Like, yes, we know this lady is doing stuff that she's not supposed to be doing. We haven't been able to prove it yet. But he's one of those. He's like, yeah, but she sent me a picture of the kid at 8:30 at night. And she's at that guy's house. Um, and while yes, I agree, that's aggravating, and we probably we know or we think that she's probably staying there overnight. But they're going to laugh you out of the courtroom if you try to present that as evidence that she's living with this guy just because she sent you a picture of the kid at the guy's house at 8:30 at night. Um, so it's just managing their expectations, managing what they think we can and can't do. Some people talk about, and we almost got into this earlier, but some people think that because I'm not a police officer that I can do stuff that
either bends the law or flat out breaks the law. And that's just not the case. Like we have to follow the law just like any other civilian would. And we can't break the law. The same laws that the police have to follow, we have to follow the same laws. I can't bend the rules and do, and it says in my retainer, I'm not going to do anything immoral. I'm not going to do anything unethical, and obviously not going to do anything illegal. So I guess that's the biggest thing, managing personalities and managing expectations is a lot of it.
Well, you're definitely upfront about the expectations, and you're good at what you do. So, to hear you talk about, like, if somebody were to get into investigative work, I think I'd be a great private investigator. But like you said, it's, part of it is, investigating, but the other part of it is actually running your own business, and figuring out how to make that lucrative. And, you have a lot of different services that you provide, but you're just one guy. So like with process serving, I know you have somebody that helps you with that and that sort of thing. But if you're always in the car doing surveillance, then you're not at your desk taking on new clients, or you're not out process serving and things like that. So really, there's a lot to it. And then, of course, anybody out of the gate can think they can sit on the curb and take video of somebody, but knowing really what the court needs to build a case, not just obtain surveillance, but to actually build a case. Yeah, I mean, having that seasoned investigator, and like you said in the beginning of our conversation, asking the right questions. Now I think one of the questions that I would have is, if I was involved in an infidelity case, I may ask you, what all do I need to collect through a private investigator to prove infidelity in my divorce case? And that would be a great way of asking that. So definitely learned a little bit in this interview today on how to conduct myself with a private investigator if I ever need one. And of
Yeah.
course, you know who I'll call if I ever do.
Yeah. I got
It'll
you.
be Magna
Well, and
Investigative Group.
I've learned a lot from you just because of your experience with, because I don't have a lot of experience working missing persons cases. As a police officer, I would, there were several times where, I might be the first one on the scene of a missing persons call, or something like that. But as a patrol officer, you don't have a lot of experience actually investigating or doing a missing persons investigation. You're there to get the basics, fill out the report, and then you turn that over to an investigator who, and you may never hear the outcome. You may never hear anything else about it. So getting to deal with you and knowing that you do this, nationwide and have so much experience with it, I've learned a lot, a lot from you and your experience, and just listening to you talk about things, NamUs, and things like that. That when we first sat down, you talking about that HPD, didn't know what that was. I didn't either, because I never used it. I never used it at HPD. I never had never knew that I had a reason to use it.
And
So
in HPD's defense, a lot of agencies don't use it.
right,
But it is a good way, and to like legitimize a case, I guess. Yeah, and there's really a system of procedures that needs to happen in missing persons cases. I'm still learning every single case, and I'm sure it's the same for you as an investigator. Every single case, you take tidbits and you just
yeah,
pack those in your bag for the next one.
yeah, yeah.
Well, how can people find you? I know your website is magnainvestigativegroup.com. Give us your phone number and tell us, how can people find you if they want to hire you or they want to consult with you about their own case?
Yeah, you can call me, text me anytime. It's 256-345-8898. You can email me at james@magnainvestigativegroup.com, or James at, if you can't remember that, I had to get another one to shorten it up because that's a lot to try to spell out for somebody on the phone. But James@magnaig.com. And it's Magna, Magna, not MAGA, because I've had some people been like, "Oh, big Trump guy, huh?" I'm like, no, it's not MAGA, it's Magna.
It
Um,
is Magna.
yeah, but yeah, we got our website, and we also have process servers, Huntsville.com, and that one's kind of a backup kind of thing, just trying to get the word out there about the process serving side of the business. But our main website is magnainvestigativegroup.com, and we've got all our information on there. I've got my bio is on there, and kind of telling, a little bit about me and my history and some of my training experience and stuff, and then some of the services that we provide. And you can reach us on the website, email, phone call, text message, pretty much any way that you can come by. Some clients, I never meet them in person. The entire case, we've handled everything on the phone and online, or emails and Dropbox and stuff like that. Some, they want to come in. They don't want to talk about anything on the phone. They want to come in. We can do everything in person. I have an office in Huntsville, but I'm available to go anywhere the client wants to meet all over North Alabama. So
If I could afford you, I would just pack you with me and take you everywhere I go, James. It's been so nice to work with you, and I'm glad we got to sit down today and kind of talk about what you do. Certainly, I never really recommend people hire private investigators because so many of them are aggressive and they're not honest about their outcome. They really pitch themselves as law enforcement. A lot of times they try to pass themselves off as law enforcement. I worry about that. I know when you were obtaining our surveillance footage, I was like, well, what are you going to tell them? You're like, I'm just going to tell them that I'm a private investigator helping the family. And you walked out with the footage. So, yeah, maybe honesty is the best policy, and having that soft approach is helpful. Maybe it doesn't take such an aggressive approach. And of course, you didn't send your menu of prices right off the bat and demand payment before we ever had a conversation. So I think that helped as well. I think you're a great guy as well as a seasoned investigator. And I love what you do. So I wish I could just take you with me for all my cases. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't have private funds to be able to hire a private investigator, but I've definitely seen in this case how it can pan out and how it can pay off. So I would encourage people, if you have the funds to hire a private investigator, do so, because you really can kind of mess things up for yourself by doing it on your own. And of course, a private investigator is going to have more knowledge about what you need, like James said, and hopefully serve you well and spend your money, well and in its best form to help you in the long run. So, James, thank you so much for joining me today.
I appreciate you.
Maybe we'll sit down again and go over some of your hidden cameras and your collection there.
We can do it.
All right. We'll
Sounds
talk
good.
soon.
I appreciate you. Thank you for everything.
If you enjoy our content and want to stay updated with the latest crime stories and exclusive insights, visit crimedesk.live. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel and hit the bell to be notified as stories unfold.